is life arbitrary?
There are so many different ways you could answer that, really. And I think you have to sort of ask, like, how do you define arbitrariness or purposefulness for something as basic as life itself, you know?
Okay, I could try to define those terms.
Yeah.
Let's say arbitrarity is a lack of ultimate purpose to life.
Well, that's another thing. Like, when people say ultimate purpose, what they're often looking for is like a purpose that is decided for them, that comes externally, and I don't think like that can meaningfully exist. I think purpose is like inherently a function of the human mind. So, like, in a way, you could say it's arbitrary, but I don't think it's entirely arbitrary, you know. It's just not external.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that it's, in a certain sense, it's arbitrary because it's not cosmic, or outside of ourselves. But in another sense, it's not because of our personal experiences that have meaning to us. Is that what you're saying? I mean,
Roughly speaking, yes.
okay, then how would I make it less rough?
Not sure exactly. Our personal.
So these are really hard questions.
It is, yeah.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
So, like, there are non-arbitrary psychological things that, like, make one thing meaningful and one thing less interesting or more interesting to us in general.
And by psychological, do you mean, like, dopaminergic? Like someone's neurochemical balance reacts to a particular phenomena in some way to make it meaningful to them in a various experience.
Yes. But like what I'm getting at is like that meaning, I think, even if you can reduce it to chemicals, it is real.
Okay.
And it is as ultimate as you're gonna get.
Yeah, that's fair. So is there a consistency across individuals with regards to how a human person can find meaning? Like, because all these people are trying to write books, trying to give speeches. This is how you find meaning in your life. Do you think they're just talking about this idiosyncratic method that only works for them? Or is there a method of meaning making that applies to every individual?
There are more and less universal ones.
Is there a universal one?
I don't think.
One?
No, I don't think there is. I don't think anyone can come up with this is the way that you find meaning.
Is there one that's so universal that it's like applies to everyone a little bit?
I mean, maybe, but I couldn't tell you what it is. And there's also a degree, like, if I think you found one, it might be a kind of tautological thing, where, like, in order to find meaning, you must look for meaning. Yeah.
Sure.
I think there are ways, like through applied psychology and philosophy, that you can find like a way of getting at meaning that works for a lot of people, even most people, but everyone's different, you know.
Okay. And do you think religion is kind of for people that are stupid, or is it like, can an intelligent person rationally be religious?
I don't think religion is for people that are stupid, first of all. I think there are good reasons to, at the very least, hold some sort of belief in an underlying force to the universe that we can't understand. And I think there are experiences that the most rationally minded person can have that will still lead them to any number of differing beliefs about the nature of the cosmos. I don't think that I'm less inclined to believe or like take a religion seriously the more verifiable claims it makes that have been verified false.
Okay.
For example.
But doesn't every religion make some form of a verifiable claim?
Yeah, I wasn't speaking so precisely. I mean, like, when you have... when a religion is based on a book that makes a ton of very specific claims about what happens in the afterlife, what happened in history, and all of these things that are unknowable or can and have been proven false, I am inclined to think that it's a sort of religion that people believe not based on their experiences or because it's personally helped them, but on like a degree of faith.
Okay.
And I think there's a sort of danger in believing things that you cannot prove. It might lead you to do things that are wrong or harmful based on false information.
Yeah, but then, did you say that it was okay to believe in something just because it makes you feel good?
That's not exactly what I meant. But I think there's...
And I'm not trying
there
to...
are
I'm not
beliefs.
Trying to, make what you meant crude or anything.
There are beliefs, I think, that are ultimately harmless. Like, again, the belief in some underlying force to the universe we can't understand. That I think it is okay to believe in if they make you feel good. When it comes
okay
to like,
it's almost like a forgivable offense. It's like, yeah, life really sucks.
I suppose so.
If this gives you like some solace.
I suppose so. And to an extent, I mean, there are genuine reasons to believe in such things beyond just they make you feel good. When it comes to beliefs that affect on how you treat other people, I think we need to be a lot more careful. Or like how you place yourself in the world.
Yeah. It's just hard for me to think of a belief that doesn't, to some degree, like, inform how you should treat other people or how you should see the world. Like, if something doesn't inform how you should treat other people or how you see the world, it's hard for me to even think of that as a belief. You know what I mean?
I guess so.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to trap you. I'm just like speaking out of my mind, honestly.
Yeah. And I mean, perhaps that leads to we should like question all of our beliefs. We should not take anything purely on faith or purely on some personal experience.
Yeah.
We should take that with a grain of salt.
Okay, and so what method do we use to evaluate our beliefs when we're questioning them?
Well,
do we use like an empirical kind of method where we try to verify it through the science and math?
Yeah, I think so. An empirical method is one of the most reliable tools we have, because it produces results that are consistent. And I think that's a very important property for any sort of epistemological method to have, is that its results are, if not entirely consistent, can at least lead to a self-consistent system of beliefs.
Okay. Do you think everyone would be better off if they just became rational scientists?
I think everyone would be better off if they were, if they approached things rationally, yes.
Okay, but is there a difference between just pure rationality and a sort of empirical approach?
They kind of work together.
They work together.
There are different parts to it. Like, I think empirical, like, observation is part of rationality. So is logic. So is critical thinking. Like, so is recognizing your biases.
Yeah.
And that all sort of works together towards rationality.
Okay. Could two people see the same set of empirical facts and come to rationally different yet valid conclusions?
Perhaps. But there's a limit to like how useful those differences are. And when those differences are like important and useful, then that is an avenue for further exploration. Because that often means you can verify that one is true and one is false.
Okay. And so, let's say an experiment has very clear data points that seem to verify a particular fact, but certain people see that fact differently. Like, let's say, okay, this is not an empirical study, but it's closely related. It's a mathematical proof. Would you say that it's pretty much the similar thing? In some respects, at least.
We can have this discussion about mathematical proofs. I think they're related.
Okay, so let's say we talk about Gödel. You know, he had the incompleteness theorem, where he demonstrated that a simple system of mathematics can be neither complete or sound at the same time.
Yeah.
And it seemed very straight. Like, it seemed like he did it in a way that was clear and unarguable.
Yeah.
Yet people took that proof and came to different conclusions. Like, some people say, okay, well then mathematics, which is in some sense the engine of quantifiable science, is epistemologically like flawed, and we can't trust it with everything that we have. But other people said, oh, I don't really care, I just like building cool machines, and it doesn't really matter what if it's who cares about epistemology, listomology, I don't care, we can build cool machines. And like, are either of them, like, I don't know, maybe I'm rambling, but like, are they both rational in a certain sense?
I think it is very important with that theorem to, I guess, be wary of
like the relationship to philosophical conclusions might not be as clear as I made it seem.
Yeah, so I think that one of those parties was saying this is significant in terms of the epistemological validity of mathematics, and others were saying, well, it's not. And I think the general consensus nowadays is that it would be really bad if we could actually prove mathematics to be inconsistent. We would need a new system of mathematics if that happened. But for now, all we've proven is that we cannot prove it consistent,
Well, at least that it's not complete without being inconsistent.
Yeah.
So it can't give us everything.
Yeah, it can't give us everything, exactly.
Yeah.
There are some problems whose answer cannot be found within arithmetic.
Yeah.
And I don't think it would be reasonable to say this theorem doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of like priorities and relevance to given situations.
Okay, so it's something like a value hierarchy?
I guess
we value things differently based on who we are?
Well, in your example, I think that was what was happening, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's a difference in values and like your appraisal of the importance of certain things.
Yeah.
So, in one context, there's also a matter of context. In one context,
Yeah.
it might be very important to know that there is no universal algorithm for proving anything in mathematics. In other contexts, it doesn't matter as much.
Okay. So it's a matter of context,
Yeah.
and in certain fields of study, maybe certain worldviews, the validity of the epistemological method of mathematics matters more. And so you should weight the theorem or value the theorem in proportion to that.
I guess. Not sure I'm making.
No, this is like really
Makes
abstract,
sense.
and
Yeah.
we might be like too far afield to make sense of these things.
Yeah.
And so maybe we should just try to rein it back in.
Yeah, sure.
So I'll try to rein it back in, but try to do something at least tangential to that conversation. Like, is anything have objective value, or is it just the eye of the beholder ultimately?
That's a similar question to meaning. I think like there are arguments you could make about value that will be convincing to other people, that will be relevant to other people, but ultimately value is a function of the mind and of society. So when you're looking for objective value, I don't think you're going to find value that exists entirely independent of humans, but certain forms of value can either be reasonably derived from other values, or derived from like the simple belief that all people are equal, for example.
Yeah.
Or that all people are fundamentally matter in some sense.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that value as such is something that can't be found outside of human experience or outside of humanity. But there's a certain set of axioms maybe that you ought to build off of when attributing things with value. One of them maybe being seeing each person as intrinsically valuable.
Yes.
Okay. So, is life itself, like if life was to cease to exist, then value would mean nothing, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as life does exist, is life valuable?
Yeah. Well, I think as soon as any person has the capacity to value things, value exists.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think specifically, like our systems of ethics come from the realization that since I intrinsically value things, I inherently believe that the things I value are valuable.
Yeah.
That must, to some extent, go for other people.
Okay. Fair enough. So then let's just say that you can't find value outside of ourselves, outside of humanity. But it sounds like there's still a universal set of values that applies to everyone that is a human, that can value things, or at least an intimation of one.
You raise an interesting point. I think that these are not like values imposed on humans by anything external. I think they are values that are to some extent intrinsic to what it means to be a human, or can be derived from that.
Yeah. And so then it makes it universal, right? Because everyone who is a human would derive the same values,
Yeah.
at least some of them.
Yeah, it's semi-universal, I guess.
Semi-universal. But, or maybe just universal, but only these things and not, a
Yeah.
whole big system of morality. Whatever.
Yeah, it's universal but not external, basically.
Universal, but not universal in the sense of universal to all human beings.
Yeah.
So how do you conceive of a world outside of humanity? Because isn't your very perception of the world a kind of a reflection of your humanity? Like how do you even get beyond your perception that is kind of intractably human in order to think about a world outside of humanity?
I don't think you really can.
Okay. Then should you if you can't?
I think we should like using our human tools of observation and reason try to come to conclusions that are as close to universal as we can get.
Yeah. Well, this is a hard question. So, okay, go on.
Yeah,
go
but
on.
we're sort of trapped in that human perception just by nature of our existence.
Exactly. So what I'm trying to get at, a good question to ask here. If the conclusions that we draw about this external world outside of humanity, if the conclusions we draw in order to characterize that are based on the observations that we make in our empirical science, how can we trust those conclusions if our very act of observing these data points or our very act of observing these facts is intractably human in a way that we can't perceive outside of? You know what I mean?
Well, for one, there are measures of trust. I don't think just by the nature of the fact that even being wrong is possible for anyone, I don't think it's possible to be 100% certain of any conclusion. But there's also a pragmatic angle to this question where maybe we can't come to conclusions about the objective nature of the world, but that doesn't really matter when what actually matters is the world of our perceptions.
Yeah. I guess I'm just wondering if the conclusions that we draw based on empirical science are that there's a kind of dead world outside of humanity that exists somehow.
Mm-hmm.
How do we even have the right to assume that if the very observations are based on perceptions that, like we already talked about, are intractably human? Like how do we give ourselves the privilege of believing that there's a dead world outside of ourselves if the observations that we use to conclude that are based on our limited human perception?
Well, I think that
why do we give ourselves the privilege of thinking that?
Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe we should be more dispassionate about the nature of the universe if we cannot ultimately come to an objective conclusion about it. But I do think that that is where we move out of the domain of science and into the domain of philosophy when we are discussing things that aren't necessarily empirically verifiable, when we are talking about how our perceptions relate to some supposed external world. And on top of that, even if the world isn't an external dead thing, I still live in it. I can't really escape it, so I may as well play by its rules. You know?
Yeah, sure. There's a certain existential thrownness, is the way you might put it. You might have never heard that term before. But it's like we've been kind of thrown into this existence out of a choice that doesn't seem to be our own.
Sure.
And so we have to work with what we see and what we perceive.
Sure, that's one way of putting it.
Something like that. Okay. So Do you think there are symbolic truths that dictate consistencies in the way that the world unfolds, if you will, if I'm allowed to speak that way, that can't be verified, empirically, and I guess that might be just the realm of philosophy, like you said.
Yeah,
So
it's hard. It's hard to say.
By symbolism, I just mean like consistent patterns of thought that apply to the world outside of us.
I think there are patterns of thought that are particularly useful in analyzing the world outside of us.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, but are they true? Like, can they be true?
I don't think we can really know for sure if they are true.
Yeah.
Or what it even means to assign them a truth value.
Yeah.
But we can know that they are useful to us.
Yeah.
I think that if there is an objective pattern to the universe, it's not something that is fully accessible to us.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm fine with that. So this is going to sound abstract, but this is something I've been thinking about, and I really just want to formulate a question to try to ask about this. So identity, right? When we identify things, when we give that pole an identity of being a pole, that tree has the identity of being a tree.
Yeah.
This table, we identify as a table. There's a certain degree of, like, there's this kind of chasm between the multiplicity of parts that this table consists of and the identity that we give it. That's this gap that it's sort of hard to see what we're doing to jump from here to there.
Yeah,
because we see these parts that are coming together to form this object, and we say these parts and no other parts consist of what is identified as this particular table.
Yeah.
And why do we draw these borders? Because when we try to program AI systems to do the same thing, it seems almost impossible. And so, like, what's happening there? I mean, and it's okay if you don't know, but
there are a whole bunch of phenomena that I think are going on there that both philosophers and linguists could talk about. Like, part of it is maybe we label this a table because that describes the function that the whole assembly has to us.
Okay, so it's kind of utility to us, to our aims, to our goals.
That's one important part of it, I think. I don't think it's the entire story, and I don't think we could even talk about the entire story in this discussion.
Okay.
I think it
seems like a bunch of us could have different goals, but everyone's usually, unless they're schizophrenic, they're going to say this table is a table.
Yes.
So
I don't think.
Is it more primordial goals?
Yeah. I guess you could say that. I don't think it's externally imposed again. I do think that there is a very good reason that we call this a table and we don't have some sort of object we call florp that is a combination of this table and the nearest trash can.
Sure. Some kind of random, like, arbitrary
or
unuseful label.
Or this table and the first 16 feet deep of the ground directly under it.
Very creative. Like why do we don't have a label to describe that? Why is that?
Because we don't need one.
Okay. To achieve our ends?
Yes, and because it is much more useful, much more compact, and because our society has also told us to call this a table.
Sure. There's the linguist side of things.
Yeah.
So it seems as though, because without the words themselves that we use to label things, it seems like this, just based on our perception, forms itself in these particular structures. And so it seems like we exist in this world, we grow up as children, and reality seems to open up to us in particular systematic ways that reveals what seem to be corporeal objects.
Yeah.
And I guess it has something to do with our ends, maybe the fact that we have to eat, so tables are good because we can put food on them, and we can organize around tables to eat as a family or something like this. And so I guess what am I trying to get at? I really just want to figure out what is the governing principle behind why is it just our biological needs that we have to fulfill, like some sort of evolutionarily developed perception?
It's a little more complicated than that, and we could be here all day discussing like the minutia of psychology, which is both evolutionarily driven and random at the same time,
cultural too.
And cultural.
Sure.
From a completely non-subjective standpoint, you could equally say that everything is one and everything is infinitely divisible into the elementary particles and possibly beyond.
Yeah.
But I think I think utility is maybe the biggest part of how we separate these things in our mind.
Man, yeah, I was really trying to dig there. We're probably too far afield again and just too abstract, but
Sure.
It's just interesting. So let's just, I don't know how much more time you have. I'll just go with the old reliable, and trust me, I'm trying to take myself utterly out of the conversation as much as I possibly can. And I've just heard this conversation circulating all the time for who knows how many years. Is there a God?
See, all of these questions are things I've thought about to some extent. I think the biggest problem with the "is there a God" question is the vagueness of
the word God.
The word God.
I agree.
If you mean just some governing force behind the universe, I can certainly get behind that. If you start applying the principles of personhood to that force, it sort of breaks down for me. I don't think the universe displays the sort of properties of a person, Yeah. I don't think it's proper to anthropomorphize it.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think going too far into the properties, we're always going to hit a wall somewhere.
Yeah. So would you subscribe to there being, you said you would allow it in some sense, but would you subscribe to a higher force that centralizes those things?
I've honestly gone back and forth on that.
Okay.
Because that is also in itself vague, what the higher force is. My world philosophies teacher a couple years ago, he didn't fully convince me that any given religion was true, but he did sort of make me understand a lot of religions a lot better. And I think what he did show me is that there is a level of reality that is more accessible to introspection than it is to the objective tools of empirical analysis, science, and logic. And I think you might be able to look there and find some evidence of an external force that grounds everything. But because it's so hard to come to conclusions about it, you could debate whether it even means anything for such a thing to exist.
Okay, fair enough. So, if it even matters, if it's arbitrary to begin with, if both answers to that question are purposeless, that sounds like what the ending flair of your answer was given, but it's a very well thought out answer. So, and I don't even want to go down the route that I just outlined. What I really want to ask is, if there is a force, suspending our disbelief, and it's definitely not a person or a being, then I guess that would mean would you believe that everything's kind of determined in some sense?
Hmm.
Or is there a certain randomness that disallows a determinism?
It's... Well, that's sort of why I am... That sort of relates to why I am inclined to believe, to some extent, in that force. Because I don't really think that logic, reason, etc. give me the tools to understand what free will and consciousness are. And I'm not talking about whether we are actually free, but like my experience of that.
Yeah, do you think you are free?
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
But I feel as though I am free.
Yeah.
And that feeling is, I don't think something that can be fully explained just through science and reason. Even though it could be fully described by it, perhaps, I don't think it's fully explained.
Oh, shoot. Well, how do you fully describe something without explaining it?
I don't know. If you describe it in terms of like chemical interactions and sort of an algorithm, I think there's just always going to be something inherently missing from that.
Yeah.
Something ineffable.
But it's described fully in the sense that it's a certain level of resolution or a certain level of analysis that you're approaching the phenomena with.
And I think we would need something deeper that is maybe not even accessible to cognition. You know?
Yeah. Not accessible to cognition. To explain that.
Like, we are not equipped as humans to understand it.
Is there any level of consciousness that would be equipped? Like, is there like maybe a higher level of consciousness than humans that would be equipped for that?
I don't know.
If that's fair.
Yeah.
Are animals conscious? Sorry.
On some level, they are.
I just 90-degree turned this conversation.
Yeah. There's also like determinism versus randomness is another interesting thing.
Yeah.
I think that even on the purely scientific level, things might be both partially determined and partially random, or some sort of controlled chaos, randomness with parameters. Like, you see in math a lot that if you arrange random actions in a certain way, they can generate a pattern.
Yeah. But then you see the same thing in math when they try to like computationally model physical systems, and they find something called chaos theory.
Yeah.
Where it just seems like nothing can be mapped, and it just devolves into a sort of untenable
Well, I
chaos.
think part of chaos theory is finding that the nature, the parameters of the chaos lead to patterns.
But patterns that seem utterly chaotic.
Sure. So, yeah. I think there's a possibility that the world is both determined to some extent and random in the way that I described. Where, like, there is some underlying randomness the randomness happens like under conditions that generate the world we see, you know?
So there's a certain emerging order that comes from a underlying chaos.
Yeah, that's one possible way of seeing it.
I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.